Hey guys, it is me, Tanya, founder of the TNG Designs Group Limited. I hope you're all keeping safe and well. Now, in this particular video, we're going to be talking about 5 brand storytelling mistakes that could be costing you. So, pay attention to all of what I've got to share with you, because the difference between you knowing this stuff versus you not knowing this stuff is the difference between you making those better connections that you're actually looking for versus not getting the results, versus not getting the awareness, versus not showing up in the way that you want to be perceived as. So, pay attention to all of what I've got to share with you. Make sure you get your pens, your papers, all your note-taking elements at the ready and get stuck into this video. But before you do that, make sure you go ahead and like and subscribe to this channel, because as always, I've got a hell of a lot of content to share with you, all about branding, all about building your reputation, more importantly, and all about making sure that you're actually showing up in a way that stands true to your beliefs, that stands true to your standards, and that stands true to the reason why you're actually doing what you're doing. So, folks, without further ado, let's get stuck straight into this. So as I said, we're going to be talking about 5 brand storytelling mistakes that a lot of people definitely make, especially as a service-based business owner, especially as an entrepreneur, especially when they're trying to build the awareness of who they are and why it is that they do what they do. They make these mistakes, and these mistakes actually I used to make way back in the day, and when I made the mistakes, I didn't get the results. And when I made those mistakes, I also saw the disconnect that a lot of people had. So, what I'm about to share with you are not only the mistakes, but equally how you can actually go ahead and flip those mistakes around. And those corrections are now the things that I actually implement when I actually work with my clients too. So, not only have they gotten the results, but equally they've seen the differences and the shifts in the connections they've been making with their own audience members too. So, let's get straight into it. And there's 2 key things that I want to make sure that you know before we get into those mistakes. First of all, this is where it's really going to pay off. Obviously, aside from knowing your VPV first and foremost, you know, I always talk about that, your brand power of 3. You've also got to know your people. Your people meaning your audience, those who you are serving, those who you are speaking to. Know what their problems are, knowing what their desires are, knowing who they are, where they've come from, what their background is about. You've got to know that, because if you don't know that, well then your element of storytelling, especially when it adheres to the idea of your brand and building a reputation as to who you are, that element right there, there's going to be that natural disconnect because you just don't know who you're speaking to. You have to know who you're speaking to. Regardless of the room that you're in, you've got to know your audience. And the next thing that you need to also know, you've got to know that story allows the meaning for why you're doing what you're doing to be translated in a way that actually starts building the trust that you're looking for. So meaning that your trust that your audience is now going to be gaining simply because they've heard your story, and simply also because they've started to relate to your story based off of the commonality factors that you're typically going to be sharing, but you should be sharing. Because of all that, they've built the trust in you, which now allows them to connect with you. And folks, that's what we're trying to do. You're making sure that you're building those connections from even your brand storytelling point of view, okay? So don't overlook this element. Do not overcomplicate the situation, more specifically, but adhere to the mistakes that are typically being made and understand how you can now make sure that you flip them around to work in your favor. So, with all that being said, let's get stuck into it. So the first common mistake that a lot of service-based business owners and entrepreneurs tend to make, they tend to make the story about themselves from the get-go, meaning that they lead with the ego element. So meaning that they sort of boast about who they are and why they do what they do, and it's just great. However, as much as some of that is okay to do, deliver it in a different kind of way, but do it a little bit later and make it about them, meaning about your audience. So instead of putting up this high achieving wall of things to make sure that they have to do in order to be able to get to those levels, whatever those levels are, how about you break down that wall of features and you start putting meaning behind what it is that you're doing? Because what that's actually doing is disconnecting with your audience. You're now pushing them back because they don't get how they're going to reach that highest of heights or what those particular features are. They don't understand how it works for them. So show them. Instead of making it about you and your main features and what it is that you do, Draw back a little bit and make it about them. Use relatable value facts that then also lead into a point where your audience can actually do a bit of self-placement. So meaning that they can actually put themselves in the positions that you're actually talking about. And what I mean by value facts, I'm talking about using statistics or using elements that allow them to relate to being in that point of view in the first place. Because remember, the audience that you're speaking to, the audience that you're drawing attention towards, yes, they might know you a little bit. Sometimes they don't actually know you at all, but they know that this person, whoever's showing up in front of them, has some kind of correlation to where it is that they want to be. So help them to understand by drawing them in and allowing them to pay attention to the general facts that they can actually relate to. So meaning, there's times when I'm actually speaking or delivering keynote sessions, and I'm obviously addressing a lot of service-based business owners as well as entrepreneurs, and talking about specifically the idea of coming out of the pandemic, right? Everybody relates to that era and point of time. What they also relate to is the idea that, you know what, at that point, there were 10 times the amount of SMEs, meaning small to medium entrepreneurs, coming out of the woodworks. Everybody was starting a business. Everybody was making sure that their talents were heard and then some. So what that meant is that that volume increased. What that meant is that the industries also became overpowered with even more talent. What that also meant was that all those that they are competing against now 10x'd. So what that then meant for them was the idea of there's a hell of a lot more competition out there. And because there's a hell of a lot more competition out there, that meant that all those that they were trying to win business over could actually be down the road from them, could be actually in the same room as them. If they're a part of mentorship groups, they could actually be in those same training rooms too. So how can you now apply that same knowledge to your own audience? What is it that they know that they've got to make sure that they do in this point of time that they can really relate to, that you can share with them? So then you start helping them to understand why they need to be on this journey. So moving on to this next mistake. This one. And I get it. Sometimes there's a lot of people out here who are actually wanting to be super passionate about what it is that they do, but they get lost into the point of their own words. So much so that they become too vague, or they do the complete opposite and overcomplicate the language that they're using. They don't understand where the point of their audience is, meaning that they don't understand how to meet their audience where they're at. So they're using the knowledge of what they have and just spewing it out at their audience. Fingers crossed, somebody's going to get and understand what they actually mean. But here's the kicker. Yes, you're talented in your craft. Yes, you know your terminology. You know it inside and out. However, your audience doesn't. Help them along the way to understand, in layman's terms, what it is that you're meaning. So that mistake of being too vague, or maybe even being overcomplicated with the language that you're using, speak their language. Help them to understand what it is that you do and why it is that you do it. For me, for example, as we know, branding can be super, oh my goodness, overcomplicated in the way how people actually explain certain things in branding. So it also becomes overwhelming. And by the way, if you're using terminology in your own craft, that's what you're doing. You're creating a sense of overwhelm to your audience. And again, you're going to make them want to push back because they don't get it. When you start using terminology like I do, for example, in my branding agency, I'm talking about things of standing out. I'm talking about things where people understand, oh yeah, we know we have competitors. There's a lot of people who are doing the same thing as us, but how do I make sure that I stand out over them? All that encompasses the idea of branding. How are you speaking the right language to your own audience? How are you using analogies, social topical issues, or even things that create commonality factors to help them to understand how it is that they can actually continue to relate and connect with you? Now, this third mistake. A lot of entrepreneurs and business owners, especially in the service-based industries, they overlook this big time, especially if you're a coach or mentor, even in the architectural realm. No matter what industry you're in, this is super relevant. I don't care if you're in construction. I don't care if you are a beautician. This is all super relevant to you. And it's the number one thing that a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs, especially in the service-based industry, which covers a hell of a lot, tends to leave out. Simply because they just want to get to the goods. They want to just make sure that their audience gets the results. But their audience is only going to get the results if they pay attention to the idea of the journey. So a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners tend to miss out what the journey was. They don't talk about that transformation or that transition period. They don't talk about the outcomes. They don't talk about what it is that they did in order to be able to get to the points where they wanted to. They don't bring their audience in. So here's what you should do instead. Talk about the process. Talk about where you were, especially if you're relating to a type of incident or a type of situation, or where again you're meeting your audience at that point, that pain point, that element of feeling stuck, that element of feeling like there's no way forwards. Position the idea of where you were at. You can do so in a way that you can actually ask them a question, a simple question. For example, you can use a question like, have you ever felt a time in your life where you felt like the rug's just been pulled from under you? A lot of people can relate to that, believe it or not, because what they're then going to start doing is start thinking about, yeah, there was that time where I remember, oh my gosh, this is how it made me feel. You're now tapping into their emotion, the element of emotion. Emotion is what helps people to connect with you, with the person that they're investing in, with the thing that is going to help them to transition themselves. So, what point of time can you relate to or connect to your audience with that helps them to understand and brings them to that same point of time? Then you move on to the idea of the process. What was it that you went through, the journey that you went through, your false wins? We've all had them. The idea is of thinking like, yeah, this is it. But in reality, no, that wasn't it. So that meant that you had to backtrack and then relearn a few things, go through the same process again and again, draw another question to it. Well, sometimes in life, have you ever felt that point where, you know what, you thought that was definitely the answer, but it really wasn't. It really wasn't. So how are you helping your audience to understand and position themselves into those moments of time as well? And finally, when you come onto the element of transition, right? That point of transformation, that point of, this is where we are right now. This is why I do what I do. How are you sharing that? You can use things like reaching certain levels of authority or credibility, or sharing your features, or sharing those who you've spoken to, connect with yourself, those who you've now helped, the thousands of people who you've now helped. How are you addressing that? How are you talking that up? Because if you don't, again, your audience disconnects. They don't get that you understand them. They don't get that you are the right fit for them. And they also won't get why they need to move forwards with you, or why they should even feel motivated to move. Which brings me nicely onto this next point. So number 4, right? Yes, the idea of motivating to move, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but I want to make sure that you are also sharing, yes, your credibility. Remember, I'm talking about, yes, talk about who you are, why you're doing what you're doing, but not in a way that draws or even pushes your audience away. You want them to understand, yes, who you are. But at the same time, believe it or not enough people share that level of credibility enough. So that's another mistake that a lot of people make. Or they, again, overshare. So you always want to make sure that you are creating this nice bit of harmony, right? This harmony level that allows people to be drawn into what it is that you're doing and why it is that you're doing it. But more specifically, that allows them to understand why this even matters. Because 9 times out of 10, you are the person, the go-to expert that people know that, yeah, I need to be working with that person. I need to be in this presence. And 9 times out of 10, your audience, yes, they will eventually see that. However, they also need to understand why. But you also need to understand the element of not only just talking the talk, but you need to have walked the walk. You need to have experienced what your audience is going to, because if you can't relate to them on that level, well then yes, again, disconnected. I feel like this is the theme, right? You're going to disconnect with your audience. don't disconnect. So what you do to avoid that, you give them what I like to call the hand up. You know, sometimes you'll see a lot on, especially on social media, or there's memes or there's images, right, of people helping somebody up to that next level. You're giving them the hand up to that next level. That's exactly what you are doing. With the element of story, with what you are sharing, you're giving them the hand up. So give them the hand up and help them to understand that with your credibility, yes, that was the journey that you went on, but guess what? You made it. So that means that they can too. What is that goal that you're helping them to reach? Keep that level of goal, that level of outcome in mind all the time. Because if you don't have that general thing or theme, if you like, that they need to be reaching, because you know what it feels like being way back here or even down there, help them to understand that they can now reach that same goal. And that by you giving them that hand up, it helps them to understand that now what? It's achievable. Because I don't know about you folks, but I've been to many a session where I've heard talks where people are throwing a hell of a lot of words at me. But what do they actually mean? What do they actually mean? Help them to mean something, right? So again, meet your audience where they're at. Help them to understand the language that you're speaking about. And then finally address this last mistake that a lot of people tend to make. And it's super frustrating, but they don't do it. They don't call them to action. Now, the reason why I said it that way is because whenever you're delivering your talk, whenever you're delivering your brand story, whether it be on websites, whether it be through social media content, whether it be you speaking in person to somebody or delivering a keynote live and in person, or even for an interview, however the delivery may be, call them to action. There is always space for that. In fact, where you feel that there is no space, make space for it, because this is where you start seeing the connections being made now. Imagine you've gone through and corrected all those mistakes, right? The ones that I've just shared. So that's putting them first, speaking to them in a language that they actually understand. And that's also making sure that not only are you taking them on the journey with you, but also you're sharing that reason or that credibility element about yourself in a humble way, obviously. You're doing the good old humble brag. But now what you're doing is making sure that the way that you are showing up, you are calling them to action to tell them to make a move. Because if change doesn't happen, well then, yeah, nothing changes, right? So we know that. So help them to understand it. And then also, in order for them to make a difference, what needs to change? These are questions that you could actually use, by the way. So how do you position that element and how do you make sure that they get it? Call them to action, make a move. Now, the way that they can do that, the tangible element, if you like, could actually be to book a call with you. It could be to download a lead magnet. It could be simply to connect with you on your social media platforms. However you want to deliver that, make sure that it is super relevant to help your audience move that one step forwards. So, folks, I'm going to leave it there. I really hope that this video resonated with you and actually helped you even more so, and even was a good reminder for yourself if you knew about these points in any case. So make sure that you go ahead and share this information with all others who you think could really, really benefit from a video like this. And more importantly, go ahead and like and subscribe to this channel. Then do this next thing. Click on the link that's below this particular video. When you do so, yes, you're going to be asked for a few details, but then what I'm going to do for you is to make sure that you tap into these 6 key principles that I always share not only with my clients, but I also practice myself in all that I do. What will happen is with these 6 key principles, they're all about branding. They're all about making sure that you are not only standing true to your brand and your beliefs and your standards, they're also all about how do you make sure that you keep and maintain and sustain those connections that you're making. The ways that you actually talking about yourself, the VPV element, right? It's going to strengthen that. It's going to help you to understand how to make sure that you are talking to the right kind of a people so that you're making those better connections that not only make sense, but then also lead to results that you're also looking for. So click on that link that's below this particular video and it'll be in the description box. It'll be the first link. Make sure you go ahead and also subscribe to this channel. And folks, I will see you on the other side.